Welcome to the Vibrant Couple. Today I have invited Irene Fehr, sex and intimacy coach, to talk about the importance of talking about sex as a couple. Welcome, Irene.
Thank you for having me.
So, why is it important to talk about sex as a couple?
Oh, well, for two reasons. One is that it's about being intentional. And what I mean by that is it's approaching a relationship mindfully, intentionally, with thought in all aspects of the relationship. It would be natural for a couple to talk about, for example, how they want to use their finances, how they want to raise children, or whether they want to have children at all. And sex is another important topic where that kind of conversation and an ongoing conversation needs to happen. And, without intention, we end up falling prey to hormones, to the ups and downs of life, to the natural devolution of sexual passion in a long term relationship. But it is when we approach relationships intentionally that we can actually have relationships that get better over time. Because we're discussing what we want, we're discussing what's important, we're prioritizing what's important and putting time and attention and resources to that. And that makes the biggest difference in any relationship and in our sex lives. So that's the first reason why it's so important to talk about sex. And the second one is that communication about what we want, what we need, what we don't want sets us up for success. And most human beings communicate when we are pressed to do that. And it's usually after a string of miscommunication, frustration, failures, disappointments, all sorts of negative things that we finally break through our reluctance and pour all of this frustration out on our partners. And the thing is, that's when communication is least effective. And so when we intentionally talk about sex, we can set our partners up for success, right? We're doing this up front rather than troubleshooting afterwards. And that is huge. That sets couples up on a completely different trajectory in a relationship than, again, troubleshooting and repairing some of the hurt that has already happened.
I'm fully in line with you. And so I believe that we should talk about sex before, during, and after. And of course, three very different types of conversations. So out of the three, which one do you believe is the most important, or the one we should pay even more attention to, or is the hardest to do?
I think the hardest one to do is to talk about what you want in the moment. Now, most people think that we have a set of things that we want, and that's what we bring into sex. The reality is that if we're really intentional and open to following what is happening in the connection, sex every time will be completely different. And so to know what is it that you actually want in the moment that this is happening, that I believe is the most challenging thing because we have to know and be connected to ourselves first and foremost to be able to do that. So that is, I would say, is kind of the advanced level of sex conversations. To be able to truly play with your partner in the moment and communicate what's happening to you and what you want. And that's what I call communication in the moment. But there's two other conversations that I teach my clients, and that is first a discovery conversation, which is great to have even if when you're starting to date, to really understand each other, to learn about each other, to find common ground, and also to find maybe areas where you're wanting different things. And then when you are in a committed relationship, it's a conversation to continue to have because sex and desires and our bodies are different when we're 20 than when we're 40 than when we're 70. And so that discovery has to be happening all the time. And the third conversation is not actually a verbal conversation, but a physical conversation. A
I like that.
conversation
And so please say more.
So it's a conversation that we are having by actually learning what, for example, touch or different positions or different kind of playful communication do for us. So I'll use touch as it's the kind of the easiest to use as an example. So I call this conversation, this physical conversation, the intimacy sandbox, because you get to experience, again, what kind of touch feels good to you. So you might play with your partner, like, could you stroke me like this? And then see what happens in your body, both in terms of sensations and also an emotional reaction. Some touch like this could feel really comforting, whereas touch like this would be a lot more sensual, a lot more arousing. And then there could be this kind of touch, which may feel like, oh, I feel like I'm, my hair's starting to stand up for electricity. Um, so you start to communicate about what your body is experiencing. And for me, as a sex and intimacy coach and also a somatic experiencing practitioner, my focus is on listening to the body and finding out the information that it's giving us. Not just what our head thinks we like, but what is our body? How is it responding? What signals is it sending? And so through the intimacy sandbox, you get to really learn what you like. Again, not intellectually, but through your body.
And so you are basically intentionally nonverbal as a way to focus more on sensations and also let go of the block we, most of us, have to talk about sex. And you basically set up a practice time in which you explore different things. And I'm assuming that the touch that you mentioned is a fairly basic one that we can do, in public, fully closed. And
Exactly.
then you have, various degrees of not necessarily X-rating, but more intensity. There are
Absolutely.
some people that have a hard time being tickled. And so it
Yeah.
may be very challenging to do that. And I'm assuming that you do that so that both parties can develop their sensitivity.
Absolutely. So, of course, there's a verbal component to this. You're expressing what you're experiencing in the body, and you're learning about each other. You're breaking through your own barriers of opening up. For some people, feeling their bodies, they can't, right? They're so in their heads, and the body is just kind of this monolithic thing that they can't break through. So just feeling your own sensations can be incredibly vulnerable and incredibly transformational and healing. And like you said, we do start with kind of PG-13 touch like this, closed on, but then you can progress in your intimacy sandbox to go into naked touch to more erotic zones and try different types of stimulation. And the goal is to learn, to experiment and experience, not get off. And this is what differentiates this kind of exploration from actual sex. Because when we are having sex, we want to be aroused, we want to be excited, we want to be kind of going somewhere. But in that, there's very little room for failure. And this is a key piece that I want to emphasize, and that is that except for the first conversation that you're having during sex, the other two are done outside of sex and even outside of the bedroom, unless you're doing it naked. But certainly outside of sex, because when we're aroused, our thankfully our prefrontal cortex goes offline. We can't think. We don't want to be thinking, right? We want to be engaged in the play, in the moment, in the sensuality, in the arousal. And so that's the worst time to talk. It's the worst time to ask questions. It's the worst time to be able to listen. Because again, the prefrontal cortex goes offline, the front of our brain that's responsible for thinking, listening, processing information. And so you want to be doing this outside of that. You want to be doing it when you're relaxed, but not aroused. so that again, you can truly learn, you can truly explore, be curious, and ask questions.
And so I totally see how this is a wonderful practice to talk more and be more sensitive to each other. In your experience, does the practice also help all of us relax and be more in our bodies and less in our thoughts? Because you know what you were describing of what we want in sex is actually the ideal picture. Most of us have way too many thoughts and judgments and self judgments while sex is happening.
Yeah. And part of that is because we want genuinely for sex to succeed. We want it to be pleasurable for us, for our partners. And so that puts a tremendous amount of pressure. And again, it leaves very room for failure, for getting it wrong, and disappointments. And so when we create that safe space through the discovery and the intimacy sandbox conversation, we set the goal as not getting aroused or not getting off, but learning. And part of learning is failing. I like to say, if it's okay if I swear on this program, is that in order
I'm
to,
French, please don't swear.
but
So I go
I
for it.
like to say that to fuck well, you have to learn how to fail well.
So I love that because one of the things that is plaguing many, and it's both men and women, although in a different way, is performing because of a fear of failure and rejection.
Exactly. And honestly, that blocks us off from magic, the kind of magic that can happen when we are open and free with each other, when we're not worrying what are we going to do next? Do we do it right? But we really get to play like children, right? Get to play and see what happens next rather than plan out what happens next. And the more you can experience that in this kind of safe setting, I call this a safe container, where you agree what you're doing, that it's not just open ended, it's you agree that today we're going to practice this close on, or today we're going to do this for half an hour. There's no, we don't need to spend hours doing this. So you know exactly what you're committing to. And then you can relax into it. You also know what's expected of you. There's not going to be, just because we're practicing touch, there's not going to be pressure to orgasm or have the best orgasm ever, but to actually focus on exploring that touch.
So you're teaching your clients to be present, to be exploratory, to be playful, to be in their bodies.
Yeah. Yeah. And all of this adds up to connection. And how I define connection is meeting each other in the moment. Connection is not one thing all the time. Connection is it's attunement to what your partner is doing and what is arising in you. And you can only do that when you are in your body, when you're open in your engagement, when you are open in your curiosity, when you are able to, like I said, dance in the moment rather than kind of rigidly be there.
You
And
know,
this is what I call connection sex. It's very much rooted in tantra and in slow sex practices, and it's about letting the connection, again, that attunement, that dance, lead you forward rather than goals. We have to do this, we have to achieve orgasm. That's the line of success. Whereas again, in connection, the connection is the marker of success.
and so your sandbox explorations are the way to practice more and more being present, being in one's body, and connecting to self and a partner, so that it's what's happening which is juicy, which become juicy, not the elusive search of what's next.
Exactly. exactly. It's about being here and now rather than focusing on what's next. What do we do? How do we do it? How do we get there? It's about being here. And that's
So,
again where the magic happens.
so how do you work with men and women let go of self judgments? You know, men needing to be the best lover, to have the biggest cock, the biggest this, the bigger that, and then women worried about their curves and their wrinkles and this and that. How do you help them go through so they can let go of them?
Well, here's the thing. I let them have those judgments. I let them go all out on them. And I help them notice what happens to the connection when they're in their judgments. And 100% of the time, what happens is there is no connection. If, let's say, the man is in his head worrying about, am I going to do a good enough job? Are we going to get to orgasm? He's going to not be in his body. He's going to be a shell of himself, and that's going to be felt by her. And similarly, if she's in her head worrying if she's beautiful enough, skinny enough, whatever it is, she's going to be a shell of herself. She's not going to be present in her body. He's going to feel it. And
Yeah.
so they're going to literally notice the feeling of what it's like to be next to their partner, yet be completely alone, separate, disconnected. And that starts to click, right? Oh, that doesn't feel good. And then by through practice of focusing on their body, they start to become more present. And then these judgments start to naturally fall away. Of course, there's more work to be done around that, but
Yeah.
certainly the beginning thing is to notice the impact that happens in our bodies when we are judgmental, when we are focused on on goals and other things.
And I'm pretty sure that you invite the partner. You know, sometimes both partners have judgment at the same time and are overloaded, but often it is just one of the two. So the one who is not in judgments can invite their partner back in their body, back in the moment, back to the connection and the play.
Absolutely. And look, it takes many times, right? To create new habits, we have to do the same thing over and over many, many times until it sticks. So for the first 20 times, they do the same exact thing that they've been doing all their lives. And then on the 21st, they're like, "Oh, I noticed I was ahead a million miles thinking about next steps, and I came back and we had a different experience." So then they start to do more of that. And then, on the 31st time, they realize, oh, we're both now doing it differently, and the experience, the connection is different. And then they create new habits, they create new patterns. But it's by no means, a one, two, or three time thing. It requires practice, especially daily practice.
And so, with the couples you work with, I'm assuming that you work with for a certain period of time, and then they have, they reach a new level of satisfaction in their sex
Mhm.
life. Um, do your clients continue practicing beyond, or is it usually something they do just as a way to get to the next level?
Yeah, all the practices that I teach are certainly about learning, right? Learning about yourself, learning about each other. But they're also really powerful erotic practices. So the touch practice, discovering what touch feels good to you and then being touched on those areas, that feels good whether you're just learning or later on. And so what I've seen across the board with the couples that I've worked with is that they continue the practices. They continue because they're so pleasurable and they're so essential to them building the intimacy that they want, that they become new habits.
So, am I hearing that they are more able to access the play that they wanted in the first place, and that these sandbox practices are one of the entries to that play.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you
Wonderful.
know, again, in the beginning, it's more about learning and a lot of the times recovering from triggers that you stumbled upon. But eventually it becomes an intimacy practice that builds connection, that builds also sexual arousal. You know, things like tantric practices such as the pussy massage, the cock massage, sensual massage. Those are incredibly powerful practices to connect through sensuality, to connect through sexual touch, not just to learn, but to actually enjoy it for its own sake.
I am assuming that your clients have a libido mismatch in which one has a high libido and wants more sex, and the other says, sorry, not happening. Please say
Absolutely.
more.
Yes, so that's my area of expertise is long-term relationships, monogamous relationships where there is this mismatch and it's typically the man who has the higher libido and the woman who has the lower libido or lower libido in quotes, lower than his libido because men's if we think about men's sexual desire, it peaks daily. Whereas women's sexual desire, if we just look at the hormonal, the biological sex drive, peaks once a month. So there's already a built in discrepancy here. But the key piece I want to emphasize is that if we look at the biological sex drive, that's the case. But if we start to expand the definition of what sexual desire is, and we incorporate what we now know that 80% of women have what's called responsive sexual desire, the picture of women's sexuality looks completely different.
Totally.
And when we include more sensuality, when we make the connection and the sexual intimacy more safer and more intimate, when we focus more on building up to touch, to more stimulating touch, when we incorporate more of the sex conversations that we just talked about, and allow women, both us women for ourselves and how men see women's sexual journey, to allow us to have time, to allow us to have the space. Again, women's sexuality looks completely different. It's not this kind of ready to go in a minute sexual model. It's more of, if you think of a flower, letting the petals open up on their time, on their own timeline. And what we end up doing, and this is what our culture in a way sanctions, is that you need to just pull the petals off of the flower to open it up. Just speed it up, just open it up. And what's left is a pile of petals and this barren, denuded flower. And that's, first of all, that's wrong. That's a violation. But second of all, it leaves women with nothing.
So I'm
And
assuming I'm assuming that part of your work is to help women say no to that. Say no. Please
absolutely,
learn to play with me, learn to be patient, learn to arouse me in ways that work for me. And then you also in parallel teach the men how different their
yeah,
wife's responsive desire is.
yeah. And how to engage her responsive sexual desire, how to play with it, how to become her hero by creating that safe space and by showing up with patience and showing up, right? And for women, a big piece is very much to what you said, is giving ourselves permission to take it slow, giving ourselves permission to ask more for non-sexual touch first, to ask for sensuality first, and to use our voice to communicate that, to not just be a recipient of sex, like however the guy wants to give it to me, I'll just take it. Maybe I like it, maybe I don't. That's how I was taught to have sex. That's how I think our society still represents sex in movies. To actually be engaged in the process, to be an active participant in our own experience and to shape it to work for us. And I think that's the last of the women's revolutions,
Yeah.
for us to gain that voice and give ourselves permission.
So I'm hearing that the couples come to you mainly with a mismatched libido where it seems that she has a lower libido. After they work with you, do they still have the conception that she has a lower libido?
No, no. Most most of the women actually become the main initiators of sex, and that they are loving the sex. And again, their experience may be different than what they thought it would be, but it is so much more robust and exciting and dynamic. And that's what we're aiming at, not just quantity, like we're going to do it 10 times a day, but that each time is so rewarding to her and to him, and they're meeting each other in that connection.
Wonderful. Well, Irene, that was such a great conversation. Please keep up the good work.
Thank you so much.
If this conversation with Irene inspired you to liberate more love, please hit the like button below and subscribe so you can be notified when I publish new juicy content. And please share with all you believe would benefit. I look forward to seeing you very soon.